Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Our regular viewers do know that I often begin the webcast a bit tongue-in-cheek, I have to admit, by pointing out that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. That's almost true. This is meant for those who are new to the webcast, who should know that this is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged or by our satire. This is broadcast number 136, and this week our friend researcher and fellow traveler, Carl Teichrib, joins us again. We will be talking about his new book, The Game of Gods. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach of Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Yeah, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw his shadow, and now we have another year of summer. Hey, I tried to talk with my tongue in my cheek. It never works. I don't know why that is.
You keep biting it. Your teeth, your tongue gets in the way of your eye tooth, and you can't see what you're saying. That's also
I'm getting a tooth pulled this week, so maybe it'll be easier. In any case, so our sponsors for this webcast include the Coexist Boutique, for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats to pick out the perfect gift. The Coexist Boutique, and Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. Assimilation Ministries. And if you enjoy this webcast, or if you really annoyed you and you want to inflict it on somebody else, to ensure continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org and click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. So our guest for this program is with us right here. His name is Carl. I want to pronounce it right. Teichrib?
Close enough.
Teichrib?
Close
Teichrib?
enough.
No, there's
Teichrib.
No close enough. It's either right or wrong. It's like Teichrib.
Hey, Ron, if you've heard how many times and how many different ways it has been butchered, you realize you're close enough.
hey, I've had my name misspelled on my electric bill. It's like for years. It's like I could have said, "Hey, there's nobody by that name here," but I did.
Well, I have that. My last name is French, and everyone wants to spell the last letter. Vino, V-E-I-N-O-T. So they call me Vinot, and I go, why not?
Why not?
Yeah, it would work if I was German, maybe, or Jewish, but...
And the book you wrote is called Game of Gods, the Temple of Man in the Age of Enlightenment. I want everybody to see that. Oh, I'm sorry, re-enchantment. I'm sorry. I'm looking at...
It could be enlightened re-enchantment even, right?
The age of re-enchantment. So we've been re-enchanted. Some re-enchanted evening, you stranger. So,
Carl, you knew before coming on what you were signing on for, right?
Yes.
I've been at this. I've been at this rodeo a couple times with you gentlemen. Yes.
So why do you call this the age of re-enchantment?
Because re-enchantment is the terminology that is being used by a small subset of academics who deal with the culture shift, the spiritual shift, the move away from Christianity and the Judeo-Christian framework for our Western civilization and into what we would consider to be the pagan age. Mm. And re-enchantment is another way of bringing that idea forward. It explores some of the ideas of Max Weber, who said
Max
that,
Weber,
hey,
let's pronounce this right.
That's right. Weber, that's right. Yes, I realize the German, there's the German, but and his concepts of enchantment and the disillusionment we have with the natural world and with concepts of religion and philosophy, and bringing that forward. Okay, now we're enchanting ourselves. We're finding a form of re-enchantment with our connection to nature, with our connection to each other. And it is, I look at this in the book and break it down as the move away from even the New Age concept of me and my divinity, though that still is in play, now more towards the idea of the we. We are doing this collectively. We are doing this as a culture, collectively, as a society. We are all one with nature, one with the deity, one with each other. And so re-enchantment goes beyond the idea of the 1980s, 1990s version of the New Age, which really was a form of spiritual human potential, and takes it in a broader view of it.
So, basically, we can't get rid of religion even if we try. Is that the idea?
No, we can't. We can't.
We can reject Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition, but we're going to gravitate towards something.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So kind of the way I described it, and then Carl has a quote that he wants to give, but the way I kind of have tried to help people understand this, at least, and it's a large book. It's not like a Sunday afternoon read right after the cartoons in the local newspaper. It's serious work about what I would say is man's religious inclinations in the future without God. They are trying to be move forward in their view of how do we do whatever we're going to do with the planet and the universe ultimately, without having to go to a God of the Scripture. So they have a different religious persuasion, essentially.
Right. But it always is geared towards a salvation plan. It's an alternative salvation plan. That's why I have one of the chapters on, just for example, going into concepts of global governance, the United Nations, world order, and I titled it The Cult of World Order, because ultimately it is a type of political cult that says our salvation ultimately comes through our political unification. And the language that is expressed, and I take you to events, I take you to different places, and you see as we go to United Nations global governance events in the book, that language is there, that hope, that aspiration, that we're saving ourselves. That is politics, but it's beyond politics. That takes a religious, philosophical perspective that we can be our own redeemers.
Well, as you just implied, if you're going to have salvation, you're going to need to have something to be saved from.
Right.
So what do we need to be saved from, according to these people?
Well, if you had been with Dawn and myself at the Parliament of World Religions, you'll realize that we need to be saved from nationalism, from religious extremism. No. Supremacy. That was the language that was used.
Supremacy, right.
Religious supremacy.
White supremacy, particularly.
So if I was at the Parliament of World Religions and I bought into this idea of I need to be saved from nationalism, white supremacy, Donald Trump, whatever it is,
evil conservatives,
Yep.
and I have all this literature, and I'm leaving the Parliament of World Religions. I get hit by a bus and I die. Okay, how much did that salvation go for? There's no need for any salvation after this life, just in this life.
But how selfish of you. How selfish of you. You're only thinking of salvation from the individual's perspective, but this is the salvation of the planet. By saving the planet, we save ourselves.
So whatever happens to me, but wait a minute. But by saving the planet, how do I save myself from getting hit by the bus and dying? That's the part I'm a little cloudy on.
Well, you should have been for the final speech of the Parliament, because it was all about we are saving ourselves. So I think, Don, you were already on the road at that point. But the final speech that was given, the final speech that was given by I think it was the chairperson of the Parliament committee, was all about we are saving. We are saving humanity by saving the earth. And he couched what we did as an act of salvation. And he said it over and over and over again. Even thanked us for saving ourselves.
So the only salvation that we have to worry about is the earth, the planet, the people. I mean, I assume that most all of these religions, maybe this is a bad assumption, but they don't really think we face any judgment in the afterlife.
I in my opinion, and Carl can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anything beyond this life is part of their consideration in general. It doesn't mean they don't think about it individually, but their idea is this kind of corporate salvation, and it is really me-centered, which is pretty frankly centrally biblically based in a sense. Here's why I say that. What was it that Satan said as he was falling? I will, it was me centered, raise my throne above the Most High. I will, and he names this, like on the 7 I wills. What was it that Adam and Eve were tempted with? You will be like God, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all temporal. It's all very self-centered and very temporal in its origin. Are they doing anything differently, Carl, than that?
No and yes. It definitely has that foundation. That is there. But then the collective says, we do this together, not just individually. We're also doing this together. And that comes in the concept of we're building heaven on earth. We're going to construct heaven right here in the now. And that goes beyond the aspect of individual deification, individual salvation from their perspective into the arena of collective salvation.
Okay, in a sense, but it isn't inclusive. And here's why I say that. It includes everyone who agrees with me. It excludes everyone who disagrees with me.
Right.
Kind of the theme song, if you will, is John Lennon's Imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No heaven no heaven above us, below us. No heaven, no hell below us, above the sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace, and all you have to do to do that is you may join us. He says, "I hope one day you will join us." In other words,
so the world will be as one.
My religion, we'll all get along.
Right. Yeah. So the world will be as one. Right. Right. Exactly, Ron. Right.
So yeah, but then he got shot and died, right?
He did.
Okay, so like, what good is this world being as one, even if it comes true? What good does it do him?
Zero.
So it's like,
and if we're right, and this is difficult, if we're right, his theology changed immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And that's actually the sad part in a way.
Right.
It's because it's tragic. There's a tragedy.
Oh yeah. So what can you give us a panorama of your book?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I can break it down in one sentence, and then we can pull that apart if you want. Basically, humanity has three great desires: to be as God, to be masters of meaning and purpose, or masters of meaning and destiny, and to build heaven on earth. And really, that's what the book does. In 500 plus pages, it offers a broad survey, and it takes that concept apart in five parts in the book. The first part introduces the idea of oneness. It introduces to you, the reader, myself, part of my own story, experiencing the idea of oneness from an education conference I attended with Robert Mueller, who was at that time a retired official with the United Nations. He has since passed on. And he was telling all of us at this education conference, we are all divine, we are all one, we are all moving into a form of oneness. The world can all be as one, politically, religiously, philosophically. This is where we're going. And then I basically break down what oneness looks like and demonstrate that this idea of oneness is indeed a dominant worldview. It is evident, of course, in Eastern religions. It's evident today in our cultural acceptance. It's evident all across the board. And you just have to scratch below the surface, and it doesn't take long. Even secular humanism, which says that man is the measure of all things, ultimately takes that perspective of oneness. And I draw to some extent from the work of Dr. Peter Jones. We've exchanged things back and forth, ideas, and spent some time talking.
Job, yeah.
Yeah, and basically pulling out that hermeneutic, that model of oneness versus two-ness. I consider it and call it in my book oneness versus otherness. And so that's part one. We break that down, what that looks like. Part two, which is more or less the history of Western thought and culture, goes from the age of faith into modernity, then the breakdown of modernity, what postmodernism looks like, and then we begin to introduce the idea of re-enchantment, which in essence goes hand in hand with postmodernism, but really takes it a step further. In fact, I maintain in the book, one of the arguments is that postmodernism is in its final breath. In many respects, we're still living it all out for sure, but there is another factor in play. And so re-enchantment is that other aspect, and I bring that forward in the book as a dominant era or a major cultural pillar that we now accept, even without even thinking about it. Part 3 of the book breaks it down from a biblical perspective, and it's 3 chapters. One being as God, taking the idea of transcendence, looking at God as the other, and then doing something a little bit different, looking at it from the perspective of human collective action. And everybody automatically goes to the Tower of Babel. I start with the first city in the Bible, and the first city of the Bible is the city of Enoch.
Yeah.
And break that down as well for my audience. Part 4 of the book, I know, Don, you've read part 4. It really is 4 chapters demonstrating 4 different ways that is now being evident in our world today: the political side, global governance, world order. And then we jump into interfaithism, demonstrating that as a form of spiritual politics, because it is spiritual politics. Hey, you and I both have experienced that at the Parliament. It is spiritual politics. And then what transhumanism looks like, that's a completely different chapter. And then finally, the last chapter in part 4. And each of those chapters in part 4 stand alone. They are independent, demonstrating that this view, this oneness view, is evident across a spectrum of ideas. And so that last chapter in that section is on culture: Burning Man, transformational culture, evolutionary culture, and what that looks like. And the very final chapter breaks it down in terms of what it means to be an ambassador for Christ, taking a look at how we can take tangible action points to be an ambassador for Christ in this age of oneness. Because ultimately, this isn't just simply an exercise in exploring ideas and thoughts and information. This is not just about information. I don't want it to be that. It desperately needs a response, not a reaction, a response. And the response is, we need to take this information, we need to take this knowledge, and then apply it into what it means to be an ambassador for Christ.
Yeah, that is really critical. I have watched, now as you know, I grew up as an atheist. My father was an atheist. And my view of the church was, I didn't understand the church prior to becoming a Christian, and frankly, my understanding hasn't improved greatly, because I saw the church as kind of this weird club that you have to admit you're a sinner to join, and then pretend the rest of your life you're not. And I really don't get that. Having said that, I have watched the church kind of pursue, how do we grow numerically and financially to be a powerhouse for the Lord in our culture? And there's part of me that goes, I kind of get that. But as I get older and I understand more about history, I look back, and Ron and I have had this discussion. We've written on this a lot. The time we live in today is more like the first century than any time in between. We had a largely westernized culture from 300 or so to about 1960. And since 1960, well, prior to 1960, it was working, and you lay that out, I think, in the book, and we have too, but has really come to fruition in the 1990s and early 21st century as being what it was like in the first century. So I think the question as ambassadors really is this: does our evangelism occur inside the church, or should we be training, equipping believers who live already in a pagan culture to be able to reach their pagan neighbors?
Yeah. And,
Right.
when you talk about the church being a cultural powerhouse, that, what does that mean? You look at the opening chapters of Genesis, and you look at the line of Cain and the line of Seth, and you look at all the people who were real cultural powerhouses, the inventors, the inventor of musical instruments, and the others. They were all from the line of Cain. And it's not that I think that the line of Seth wasn't involved, but it's like we are. When you look at the Renaissance, what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was kind of like a re-enchantment before the re-enchantment.
Absolutely. I bring that up, Ron, in my book. The Renaissance definitely was a renaissance of paganism in a sense.
Right. It was, right. I mean, Petrarch, what is he really interested in? He's interested in he was just so taken with the prose of Cicero, and just how how elegant those ancient Latin authors were. Of course, it was their language, dummy. You learned it as a second language. You're an Italian, I mean, so it's like well, Michelangelo and all these guys, they're really fascinated with paganism. With you look at much of the art was a hearkening back to pagan deities.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Ron, because I touch on it. I only touch on it in the book, but the Renaissance, its pagan expression came out in garden statues, garden, back to nature and natural elements. It came out in pagan pageantry. It came out in pagan parade. And there was a real interest in what the pagan world could teach mankind at that time. And so while I do bring the Renaissance into play, you have to, because that really is re-enchantment version 1.0, really. And we are at this point in a type of re-enchantment version 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, we went through the scientific revolution, and then people debate over just I mean, if you look at the Enlightenment as a discrete period of time, usually it has boundaries, beginning around the middle of the 17th century and going
right.
How far, depending on how you date it. But some people would say the Enlightenment mentality probably ended around 1950 or so, where there was this transition to what you're talking about, where there is. I was a big science fiction fan, huge science fiction fan growing up, and I read, of course, the old writers, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Ray Bradbury, and they all looked back on the Renaissance as this fabulous period of rediscovery of intellect and science, and they had characters in their books who named their children after Leonardo da Vinci and all that, these Renaissance men. And now science fiction today, it's like you can't do that, because those are all dead white males who corrupted the entire I mean, the new science fiction writers are all embracing this world of intersectionality, where this is all evil. So when do you think the transition began into what we now call postmodernism?
Now, you know what? Hold your answer, Carl, and I want you to answer that question. But we really do need, because there are other things that happen as a result of all of this that we would call conflict. But we have to figure out a way to maybe get along. How can we all get along, right?
Yeah, because intersectionality hasn't exactly brought unity to the world, has it? So
no.
Yeah, and neither has postmodernism, for that matter. So let's talk about that and ask some questions. For instance, do you struggle with finding the right wine to bring to pagan goat sacrifices? Do you wonder what to wear to your neighbor's neo-Nazi parties? Do you get anxiety attacks when trying to find the right picket sign to share with your friends from Westboro Baptist Church? Well, now you can put an end to all the worries that come from trying to fit in with people on opposing sides of the culture wars, because you can find the perfect gift for any ideology at the Coexist Boutique. This week's special deal at the Coexist Boutique in honor of the 50th anniversary of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. Relive the days when university students subjected their professors to public shaming sessions in which they would break their eyeglasses and publicly rebuke them at great length for not exhibiting politically correct opinions and behaviors. Oh, wait, that's going on right now in the USA. Okay, well, this week's special deal: Cultural Revolution eyewear, genuine smashed Chinese prescription lenses and frames formerly owned by the PhDs and university administrators, dating back to 1966 to 1976, which was the period of the Cultural Revolution. Yours for only 99 cents a pair. The Coexist Boutique, for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats to pick out the perfect gift. So you really can't beat those eyeglasses. They're kind of smashed and everything, but they make a statement.
Yeah, they do make a statement. Maybe we need to send them to all of the members of Congress as they are moving in that direction, it seems like.
Well, actually, I think we should send them to Evergreen State College was it Oregon or Washington? I forget. And some of these other places where they've had, basically they've done it. They haven't actually taken the eyeglasses off the professors and smashed them, but they've smashed some careers.
Well, we've had, as Carl is going to answer this question, I'm going to throw two others out there just kind of to keep them in our mind. One is, it sounds to me like unappreciation of goodness, truth, and beauty in the work of fallen image bearers. What am I missing? That's the question there. Another one is, doesn't postmodernism, it has a precedence of leading to continual compromises. Now, back to Ron's original question, which maybe he remembers it, I don't, but...
Well, when do you think postmodernism? When do you think the transition? Right. What were the dates? I mean, some people say, "Wow, postmodernism goes back to the Dadaist movement in Switzerland during World War I." Other people say the first postmodernist architecture occurred in the year 1971. You hear all these dates thrown out. First time the word was used was in a piece of literature in 1924. But I mean, it's like to some extent you can say some people saw something coming. Something that followed modernity, and I would define modernity as the belief in, science became the Messiah. Science was going to save us. Right. And when science started blowing up cities with single bombs, then people started saying, I don't know if science is going to save us anymore. It looks like it's going to kill us. And so we transition into this thing called postmodernity. And do you have a time frame? And when you're talking about it ending, can you talk about that as well?
Sure, but first, let me take my eyeglasses off.
In celebration of Mouse Teeth.
I'm sorry, guys, I had to do that.
Well, that's good.
I argue in the book, and I actually look at the defining points of when the age of faith begins to break down and switches into the age that we would consider to be modernity. I use the French Revolution as a starting point, and I admit you can have a number of different lines where you can begin modernity, and then where I see modernity breaking down and coming to its end in a significant sense. Of course, the argument is we still have modernity, and we do. People still think in that construct. I make the case that the last helicopter leaving Saigon was the end of modernity. I make the case that the Vietnam War.
Why that?
Why that? Because the Vietnam War was the last war of modernity. If you remember, Robert McNamara was a technocrat.
Yeah.
He viewed the war through the perspective of, are we winning or losing, based on statistics, based on hard analysis. Of course, he was a bombing analyst during World War II, and he was the first non-family president of Ford Motors. He was brought in because of his technocratic prowess. His mind was scientific, it was engineering, it was technical. And what was brought to the battlefield in terms of a sense of are we winning or losing was a statistical analysis perspective. That's not how you consider winning or losing a war. The Vietnamese didn't consider it through a statistical analysis. They had a completely different objective in mind. And so what you ended up having was the Vietnam War becoming the war of bureaucracy. It became a war of policy. It became a war of if you wanted to get anything done on the ground, and whether you were in the Air Force or whether you were a grunt, you ended up having to break rules. You had to break the operating procedures of the day, because it might all change. If you were an Air Force pilot, 1 month you could bomb a certain territory. The next month, if you saw trucks from the North Vietnamese side pulling over onto the side of the road, no, you can't bomb them now because the orders had all changed. It was constantly changing all the time. And what ends up happening from the ground all the way to the White House was a culture that no longer was trustworthy. It was a culture where Americans, citizens, no longer could view their own government as trustworthy. Authority, the idea of authority, broke down. The idea of trusting institutions broke down. The idea of having structure breaks down. Vietnam is when America wrecked itself morally, philosophically, on the on the bayonets of Southeast Asia. What's interesting is France did the same thing. When France was wiped out in Vietnam and their final war, Dien Bien Phu, finished the French in Vietnam, France itself went into a period of, well, can we trust authority? Where do we stand as a nation? It had an incredibly powerful impact across French culture.
You have another line though that kind of predates getting there, where I would suggest it became public that that's what was going on. But you've had kind of a ongoing battle between socialism and capitalism,
right?
Absolutely. And which starts to come to more public focus in 1951 when Buckley did God and Man at Yale, saying, "Look, you guys can teach whatever you want to teach, but you should at least let your donors know that you're teaching against capitalism, because they may not really want to support your university if they knew that you're teaching against them."
Yes.
Right? And all of that influence starts coming into play in the 1960s as kind of cultural radicalism, which you pointed out, comes out. Vietnam was a perfect sort of
it was a storm
scapegoat. Yeah, it was a storm to use, but this all predated that actual event.
Right. Well, and the other thing I bring into play is Esalen, and the influence that Esalen brings in, and the influence of spiritual or religious tourism into India starting in the late 1950s.
Explain Esalen for those who have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, sure. The Esalen is an institute. It started off kind of more like just a retreat center in Big Sur, California. And it started in the early 1960s, in part through the encouragement of Aldous Huxley. And Esalen really became the gatekeeper to bring the East into the West in the 1960s, and early 1960s. Keep that in mind. And so Esalen really is this bridge between Eastern mysticism, the psychedelic, the world of the psychedelic, and the human potential movement, human potential psychology. That begins in a significant way at Esalen. Now, Esalen becomes this hub where all of this is being mixed into the 1960s. And so you have the Hollywood insiders, you have academic elites, you have liberal theologians. They're all going to sit in the hot tubs and soak in the hot tubs.
Politicians, Ted Kennedy, who kind of made the move to bring, through immigration, bring Eastern mysticism into the nation.
Right. And so all of this is taking place at the same time. And I view the Vietnam War as just simply that the catalyst, the crushing catalyst, that storm that breaks. But it's already in play. And I view Esalen as having a significant role in helping America's culture accept that Eastern worldview and marrying it to psychology, and human potential.
For those who are watching, spell Esalen so they know what we're talking about.
Esalen. Going now.
It's
so it's not echelon, it's Esalen.
Esalen.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Yes.
So I kind of look at culture as a whole bunch of currents that are going in various directions, or you could look at it as wind blowing in different directions. Maybe that's even more accurate because the wind keeps shifting. And some people are blown with one wind current and other people are blown along by another wind current. But sometimes they kind of different wind currents can come together and pull people from disparate backgrounds in generally the same direction. So you have, I remember the 70s pretty well. I was in high school, junior high and high school, graduated high school. I even got married in the 70s. It was really a very, in terms of the American culture, we were really down on ourselves. We had the biggest presidential scandal in history. We had an energy crisis. We were constantly told that we're consuming too much energy. We even had a president who went on TV to remind us of this. We had, and of course, we had the first war that we have to say, well, we lost it. We did not win the Vietnam War. So what do you call it when you don't win a war? People just wanted to forget it. People just wanted, and when we forgot it, when we totally forgot it, then on the heels of the Vietnam War, you have the Pol Pot massacres in Cambodia,
right,
that were connected to what we did, but nobody wanted to take responsibility or lift a finger, and so that just made us feel even worse when we found out about them.
Right.
So
we had that, and we also had politically, we had a president who had been caught being distrustful, shall we say?
Untrustworthy.
Untrustworthy. Kind of giving the radicals who are going, you can't trust the government, real evidence that they can't trust the government.
Yeah. And well, anyways, it was a kind of a, Carter talked about a spiritual malaise. It was, whatever. It was a malaise, that's for sure. I don't know. Do you remember the 70s much?
I was there. I was young, but I was there.
I do, because I didn't do drugs, so it's easier for me to remember.
There was even a Canadian DJ who put together a record designed to kind of boost America's spirits, because everybody was down on us and we were down on ourselves. Do you remember that one, Don? He was playing the national anthem in the background, and he was talking about all the great achievements of America and how he's sick and tired of people getting down on us, and what it's like. And I can remember thinking, yeah, whatever.
But back to the 1970s. One of the interesting things with modernity, this changeover. And I think the changeover to reenchantment also begins in the 1970s, though I put down the millennial events, and primarily what happened at the United Nations in the year 2000. I use that really as the changeover into an era of reenchantment. But you could already go back to the 1970s, and particularly one day, April 22nd, 1970, as the beginning of America's return to reenchantment, because that was your first Earth Day, when over 20 million American citizens engaged in Earth Day activities. A book was published, the Environmental Handbook, that was given out to high school students, tens of thousands of college and university students. And in the Environmental Handbook, it was very clear Christianity is at fault. Christianity is what is destroying the earth. We have a problem because of Christianity, and it was using Lynn White Jr.'s famous essay. And then the Environmental Handbook went on to even give lists of acceptable religions, acceptable practices, including what we would view as basically pagan practices. And so on April the 22nd, 1970, I could already see that being America's first taste, beyond what was taking place at Esalen. But Esalen was so important. I deal a lot with Esalen in the book. And then introducing this idea that we need to return to the mother. We need to return to Gaia.
Right. And here's another avenue, also 1970s, former Dominican priest, guess who? Matthew Fox, Earth worship, his 4 villas, and he eventually was kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church, but it took a really long time because they weren't altogether sure he was a heretic.
So what was the name of that book where that blames Christianity on all the world's problems?
Oh, it's called the Environmental Handbook.
Oh, the Environmental Handbook. Okay.
Yep. Friends of Earth and Ballantine Press put it out together, and it was used as as a textbook to give to high school, university, and college students. In fact, my local high school out in the middle of nowhere, Manitoba, we used that in the 1970s as one of our texts.
I blame the environmental movement for some of the worst clothing styles known to man. I mean, come on, it's like browns and greens, and
interesting you'd say out in Little Manitoba, because it's amazing to me how fast false teaching gets even I have a friend that lives in Cortez, Colorado, this little corner of the nation. And we did an apologetics conference there one time. It was just really interesting and fun. Small community. We got in there, and the first night, our friend Bill Hansberger, who he went to the goes to program with us, went to teach at the youth at a youth group. And as he's teaching on Wicca. And what do they pull out? Some of the young girls there in the high school group were reading, just published a week earlier, by Silver Ravenwolf, her book on witchcraft. How does that happen? So what I do is I keep in touch with Cortez, Colorado, so I know what trends are coming my way. Because they're going to get little places first.
So the cultural winds aren't blowing out of Los Angeles anymore. They're blowing out of Cortez, Colorado.
They may be published in Los Angeles, but they seem to be embraced in Cortez, Colorado before they get here.
How about New Mexico? That's kind of a hot. I mean, I'm getting the impression that a lot of it's coming through there as well.
It's Four Corners is New Mexico and Colorado and Arizona and I forget what the other one is. But in that part of the country, like in Cortez, it's really Cortez is 20% Mormon. The next town over is Memphis, which is about 50% Wiccan. They have 2 Indian reservations there. So you have a lot of spiritual, you use the word wind currents, a lot of spiritual wind currents going on in that area. So, it's a great place. If you are called to be a mission to various cultures, it's a great place to go.
And it's interesting because in Greek, the word spirit, pneuma, it means wind also, and I think the word ruach in Hebrew and, it does the same thing. It doubles the same way. The wind, when Jesus said the wind blows where it wills, he used the word pneuma.
Okay, we have 2 interacting with us here. Actually, we have several. This is kind of fun. Waddy Watch asks if you're referring to the Rio summit at the UN with the UN climate nonsense. And what was the other one I saw? Question about someone said let's talk about the 80s next. Wait, never mind.
The 80s, never mind. Well, I would say
That's good. That's good.
If my wife and I had only waited one more year, we were married in 79. If we'd married in 80, instead of wearing that hideous light blue tux with the ruffles, I would have been wearing a nice, sharp black tuxedo, because that's how quickly styles changed. They got really good in the 80s. So don't knock the 80s for everything, but there was a lot of weird stuff too. But the United Nations, let's talk about, we need to talk about the UN.
Right, because he does talk about the UN in his book, and he's got more than a page devoted to it.
Quite a bit.
I have friends who believe that it's like the worst thing ever. We got to get out of the UN. And then I say, well, before we can get out of it, we've got to get it out of New York, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hasn't it kept us out of wars? Has it done nothing that's we can say is good? Or is it a mixture? Is it a mixed bag? Or is it just really bad?
No, it's a mixed bag. And this is something that I know some people might all of a sudden be a little bit upset with me saying, but it is a mixed bag. I know people personally who work with UN programs, and they have no aspirations of taking over the world or anything along those lines whatsoever.
That's what they want you to think. That's what they want you to think.
I myself have been involved in a number of UN meetings. Now, here is where it is bad.
I don't know if we should have this guy in our program anymore, Don. Okay.
Here is where it is bad, and that is at the United Nations, that there is a very strong element in the United Nations that views itself as being the hope of mankind. I break that down in the book where I go to the United Nations Millennium Forum. I was brought in as an accredited expert on globalization, and the entire week was about restructuring world order in the image of the United Nations, that we could all come together as one. The environment was a major hot point where we could leverage that to develop global governance. We talked about creating a carbon currency. We talked about creating a global military force. All of those things that you would say are conspiracies. No, they're not conspiracies.
A military
force
that does nothing, like the one we sent into Baltimore when they were rioting. It's like, yeah, we're already there. We're already,
Right.
our peacekeepers don't know how to keep peace. I mean, that's obviously the paradigm of the United Nations.
But where the UN is especially influential, and this is something I do bring out as well, is in the development of global policy recommendations. Like Agenda 21 is a framework document. It's an existing real document. It's not a conspiracy. The Convention on Climate Change, all of these documents that came out of 1992, the Real Earth Summit. Then what happens is those documents become accepted, the concepts become accepted at the national level, they're placed within your federal agencies. Your agencies develop their own policies, their own procedures to mirror and mimic the international recommendations, the international frameworks. Then those filter down to your state level, then again right down to your county, city, municipal level. And so there is a discernible, traceable, and demonstratable point of influence from the international level right down to the local level.
Right. So they don't need to take over militarily because they're doing it subtly through these kinds of things.
Isn't the main purpose of the UN to tell us how many years until it's too late to do anything about like climate change? I mean, originally I think it was 96, and then Al Gore came and said, "Oh no, it was until 2013, and then it would be too late to do anything." And now we're hearing it's 12 years. We have 12 years until the end of the world.
Right. Well, it gave us something. It gave us something else, and Carl and I are both familiar with this part of it because you brought up Mueller a little bit ago, who was Executive Secretary of the UN for 4 decades, right?
That's right.
And he realized that you can't really have an effective UN politically without some religious intersection, right? Which gave him the idea, or at least he joined others in the idea of creating something that we go to whenever they have one, the Parliament of the World's Religions. That was sort of his brainchild. And several of us met with him in 1993, and he was incensed that we would think there's any such thing as absolute truth, and it was divisive to believe that.
He was absolutely sure of that too. I think
he was absolutely sure of that. He was dogmatically certain of that, and he was angry that we would. In fact, the first one, I don't know if you went to the one in Chicago, Carl, but
I didn't. No.
Many of the main events were geared to make fun of Christian thought and the belief in absolute truth. Their dramas and they're very, very pronounced. And they continue that even to this day. As who was Jim Wallace did he did a last night speech, right?
That's about he did the first, the opening.
The opening, the evils of Christians, the evils of conservative Christianity, basically.
Yes, and if you're for Trump, it's you're unleashing the demons, and if you're against Trump, well, you're an angel. That was how he couched it.
Right. Yeah. So even though they claim to be tolerant, they only tolerate those that agree with them. They are intolerant of those who do not agree with them. But they are working hard at becoming an ambassadorial arm of the UN. World ambassadors. Yeah, ambassador. Yeah, they want to be ambassadors, religious ambassadors.
Okay. So they're representing the religion of the UN?
No, they want to be ambassadors of religions to the UN,
religions, plural.
And from the UN to the world's religions.
And that is why we saw
both ways. Okay.
Right, and that is why we saw so many UN officials, people engaged in different agencies at the UN, at the Parliament as well.
Right.
I specifically went to a few of the workshops on the United Nations and interfaithism, and yes, it's definitely goes hand in glove.
But before we get too far along, another thing your book touches on, which seems to be to me, it's really interesting that this issue is coming up right now. And that is transhumanism, because it sounds like what people might be implying by this is that it's not enough just to change the structures of society, the thinking of society, the religion of society, but we have to change people themselves. Is that what they're saying? Or are they just saying it's inevitable that we're going to change, and here's the best way to do it? Or Or are they saying that we have to change intrinsically as human beings to make all this other stuff happen?
No, it's interesting with transhumanism is it's a bridge from modernity, and it mixes both modernity and re-enchantment together. Transhumanism ultimately says that through science and technology, we take evolution in hand, and we can reshape humanity into our own image, into how we perceive humanity to be. So we want to overcome limitations like death or aging or sickness. And we will upgrade ourselves. We will move beyond being human. The idea of transhumanism is to move into what would be considered post-humanism.
Oh, you know what? And there are ways to do that. We can do that through technological means. We don't have to just change our mind or our spirituality, but we can add attachments along the way. And we have one of our sponsors actually addresses this.
And it's a very spiritual approach that they have to getting a little too individualistic for your tastes. This is a good question. Do you often wish it wasn't so hard to fit in with new Christians you meet? Would you rather be a part of a collective than a uniquely gifted member of a fellowship? Well, now you can find freedom from the hassles of having your own personal identity with Assimilation Ministries. Our pastoral staff is ready to relieve you of the burden of being yourself. No need to choose a new identity. We choose it for you. Our assimilations come with our trans lifetime guarantee. Satisfaction is irrelevant. Where Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. Assimilation Ministries, you really want to check them out.
You know what's sad is one day no one's going to know what we're talking about with the Borg. It'll be like someone once told me that they were in a music store, if you remember what those were, with their daughter buying an album, if you recall what those were, and they heard two young girls in the next aisle talking about Wings, and they said, well, and Paul McCartney. And said, well, who's Paul McCartney? Or they said the Beatles. They said, well, who's the Beatles? They said, well, that was Paul McCartney's backup band before Wings.
Yeah, right. At least a lot of people think he thought that, but probably.
Yeah, it's Assimilation Ministry. So that's actually kind of true to where some, like the movers and shakers, are who in this theater of the mind, if you will.
Yes, well, you are. We're all assimilating, right? It's crowd gnosis. It's not just individual gnosis. It's crowd gnosis.
Oh, like hypnosis. It's like gnosis as in Gnostics. Is that what
crowd knowledge?
Crowd knowledge. Crowd Gnosticism.
Crowd Gnosticism. Like hypnosis is something different. We're not talking about that. We're talking about. Well, so define crowd gnosis for us, please.
Oh, I touch on it a little bit in the book, just hinting on it. The idea that it is in our collective, it is in our group emotion, it's in our group knowledge, which now that's where we find our purpose. That's where we find our meaning. It is in the algorithm of the masses. It's in the algorithm that comes as humanity all connects itself into each other, and therefore your identity, your purpose should be defined by the culture, by the social construct of the day, so, whatever that might look like.
An algorithm, that's not Al Gore dancing.
No, it's not. No. That would be interesting, though.
What is an algorithm of the masses?
The chapter that I deal with on transhumanism takes a look at what it looks like to be in a culture where we are all interconnected, and that really is what we are seeing today. So, let's say, Ron, it snows in your part of Florida, and the power goes down, and maybe you before the power. Yes, I know, where the palm trees never sees a shadow.
Right.
And be right before the storm hits, you're online looking at generators, and then for the next 2 weeks, every time you get online, you're being sold another generator.
I would need one.
Yes, you would need one. But all of a sudden, I mean, it's your buying habits, your behaviors, your perspective is now being filtered. Now being filtered through.
I just think about something and then Amazon puts an ad on it for me. It's like, I don't know how do they know what I'm even thinking? It's kind of scary.
Welcome to crowdnosis.
So that's what crowdnosis is.
Yes.
The algorithm.
The algorithm of the masses.
So there's a computer there, or there's probably a cloud of computers somewhere that is tracking my every word, my every, the microphones that I think are not actually on my cell phone are actually listening to me.
And the community standards of social media. Standards of social media are your
one of the things that we need to look at, your question is important, because one of the movers and shakers of the transhumanism movement is one of the inventors of the very thing that is telling you everything that you think you want to buy, or you imagine. Serge Brin is involved with that, or Sirius Radio is Martine.
Yeah. Do you remember that scene in Minority Report when Tom Cruise is walking through this corridor and there are all these ads that as soon as they scan his retina, they know who he is and they try to sell him products that he's bought before? I think that's where we are almost already.
Yes. The important part of this section I do on transhumanism is, well, first of all, I break down the history of it. I discuss the history of it. I discuss the major players and the philosophies behind it, and then demonstrate that in reality this is a form of salvation. This is another alternative salvation message, and
eternal life.
And eternal life, absolutely. In fact, the aspect of death is pretty key to the entire transhumanist movement. I had the opportunity of spending a little bit of time with a leading transhuman figure, and she brought up the issue of possibly having even vacation death. I spent some time with Natasha Vita-Moore, and that was back in the year 2013 at a transhumanist event in New York City, and we were talking about, well, what happens if you have a post-terminal existence, and
like Walt Disney? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, this is what Natasha told me, and I have it in the chapter. Death ought to not to have just one express definition, talking about the era of non-binary. We'll be redefining death the more and more we develop the sciences and technologies to intervene with death. So we have to look at death from various perspectives. You may want vacation death. You may want partial death. You may want to put into cryonic suspension or another type of preservation unit, and then come back and revisit life again. So there are all sorts of alternatives to the finality of death.
I'm really. I have to think about that. How many kinds of death can we have? What's your flavor of the month for death this week? It's like.
Well, if you were fully transhuman, you wouldn't have to think about it because you would immediately know.
What's interesting, though, is transhumanism isn't a new idea. It's been around for a long time, and when you break through the history of it all, you see elements of it all through the 1970s, the 60s, into the 50s, and it goes all the way back to the 1800s. Alan Harrington, in his 1960s book on the subject of, well, it's called The Immortalist, said this: death is an imposition on the human race and no longer acceptable. Well, really? I only know one who defeated death. Only one.
It's about time humans caught up with all those other species who have gotten over death. It's like, well, I remember I was 9 years old. And I was already a Trekkie. My dad and my brother and I used to watch the original series, Star Trek. And then when I was 9, 2001: A Space Odyssey came out. And of course, we were going to the moon. We would be on the moon the following summer, and we would keep on going back over and over again. And as a young boy and early teen, I kind of, what I'm getting at here is that the future doesn't go always the way we think it's going to go. Right. Technology we don't actually, it's like AOC, the famous, the great guru, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is now, re-enchanting us with this amazing wisdom, who said, we need to invent the technologies we have not even invented yet, just recently. she's tapping into something that has been here for 50 to 100 years or more. That is that this idea of the inevitability of technological progress. Well, okay, maybe there is a certain amount of truth to that, but it doesn't usually go the way we think it will. Like in 1970 or so, I just assumed that by the year 2000, we'd have bases on the moon, because that's what was being presented. And boy, we were getting to the moon. We went to the moon 6 times and came back, and so I figured, okay, we'll go to the moon. We'll have moon bases. By the time I'm 40, I'll be taking a vacation on the moon. Didn't happen. One thing I never thought would happen, ever, when I was that age, I never thought I'd be doing this right now. I never thought I'd have I never thought I'd have 2 or more personal computers. The idea of owning a computer was just not even on the radar screen of the average person. Right. I think in the middle of the 70s, if you wanted to buy a portable like K-Pro computer, you're going to shell out $12,000 or something like that for one of those portable ones that they actually already had, but they were for people who had lots of money. In other words, we don't know which way developments are going to go. We know which way people want them to go. We know which way. So, like, will we be able to do some of the things that these transhumanists think we're going to be able to do? Maybe we should be more concerned about what the people who are fiddling with our genomes are doing. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the aspect of going to the moon in the 1960s. One of the arguments I make in the book is that was an instrumental part of re-enchanting humanity. And the astronaut Dick Gordon, when he was asked, well, what did you discover when you went to the moon? He said, what we discovered was Earth. Part of the argument I'm making in re-enchantment, the idea of re-enchantment is that it requires a new myth. Re-enchantment requires some return to myth. Where did that myth come from? What was the root of the new myth that we would grab hold of? Well, it was found and discovered through the Apollo program as we look back on the Earth and we said, this is our home, this is our mother. And it was returned to a type of spirituality that connected us to our planet. And it's interesting, in the 1970s and late 1960s, it was the question was what will be the new myth? What will we be returning to rediscover ourselves and rediscover our connection with everything? And it really goes back to really a Roman 1 Roman 1's context, where we worship and serve creation rather than the creator.
Well, we also have this fascination with space and with the possibility of encountering other intelligent life out there. And just when I thought people were going to kind of give up on that, it sounds like they're putting new energy into it. So many different directions. It's like people think our salvation lies outside of our planet, even though we've rediscovered Earth. Now we've got to colonize Mars because we're going to destroy this planet. But have you been to Mars lately? I mean, I'm not holding out a lot of hope there. I mean, you think, how bad can we make it here so that is the alternative? That's my question.
Boy, that's a scary idea. Wow.
I like that. That's good. That's good. The alternative, of course, the real alternative that we all want is we want the movie Avatar, which is the perfect technological, techno-pagan, techno-shaman movie. We want Avatar. We want to all connect in. We want to all change. We want to all morph and all feel spiritually like we're one with the earth and one with each other. It's Avatar.
I am you, and you are me, and we are we, and we are all together.
Yeah, Beatles. Yeah. I am a walrus. Exactly.
All culture eventually goes back to the Beatles right now. It's like, I am the Eggman. So, goo goo.
Well, this has been fun as always. If you go to our Facebook site, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc., click on the Shop Now button. You can go and buy the book. And I would recommend doing that. And I would say when Carl has time, we're going to come back and revisit this maybe more in depth per chapter because it's really important. I think in fact, I had breakfast with a pastor this morning, and one of the discussions that came up, he said, I'm having such a hard time getting my people to realize that evangelism is important. And I said, well, okay, there's a couple things going on. One is that they have been sort of bewitched by culture. They think things are better than they really are spiritually. Why? Because the pagan next door works at the same place, shops at the same place, drives the same kind of cars, their kids play baseball together. The unbeliever next door is very much the same as the believer in your church, except he's unsaved. That's one. So there's not a difference in culture and language so much, so it's not as challenging. Number one. Number two, they don't really see them really lost as a result of that. Yeah. They don't realize what's going to happen when they breathe their last breath. And once you see someone as really, really lost, I am persuaded, once you see someone in a genuinely lost condition, there's no amount of money you won't spend, time you won't invest, books you won't read, in order to figure out a way to reach that person. When that happens, you will get out there in culture to try to reach the lost people.
Yeah. So once again, the book is The Game of Gods, or just Game of Gods. Carl Teichrib is the author of the book, and for some reason he's agreed to come on our program to talk about
because he has the same sense of humor we have, and he enjoys it.
So
he's watched me walking around these events in my cowboy hat and fringe jacket, and then ask really unusual questions in workshops.
Been there, done that, and it was always a lot of fun.
All right, guys, it's been fun. We've run over. If you both will hold on for a moment, we're going to say goodbye to everyone. Ron, would you walk us out of here?
Okay, well, I'll try to do it a little faster than that. Okay, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services comes from Chef Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, and why are my fonts so funny, is O.D. Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Piece-of-Me. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew LeBlanc. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for its content, although you'll never, ever, not even once, be able to prove that in a court of law.
That's true, and it could be a predicament instead of a production, but whatever.
Whatever.
All right. For those who are watching, it's been fun. Carl, Ron, hold on a second. And okay. I'm going to say adios.
Adios.